What's up, Metro City Church? We want to welcome you to this online worship experience. Come on, would you join us and sing? There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Come on, we sing just one word. Just one word. You calm the storm that surrounds me. Just one word. The darkness has to retreat. Come on, we sing just one touch. Just one touch. I feel the presence of heaven. Just one touch. My eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. Come on. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Come on, we sing just one word. Just one word. You heal what's broken inside me. Just one word, and you revive every dream. Oh, we can dream again. Just one touch. I feel the power of heaven. Just one touch. My eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. Come on. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Come on, we sing. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Come on, we sing, I will believe.
I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise. Let all agree. There's no power like.
Come on, church, let's sing that together. One more time. I will believe. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise. Let
all agree.
There's no power like His power. Come on. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't. Oh, there's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God. And we sing, oh, 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 oh. Amen.
Tries to roll over my bones. When sorrow comes, I steal the joy I own. When brokenness and pain is all I know, oh, I won't be shaken. Oh, I won't be shaken.
sing, my fear.
And my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
Come on, we sing, shame no longer.
Shame no longer has a place to hide, and I am not a captive to the lies, and I'm not afraid to leave my past behind.
Come on, we sing.
Oh, I won't be shaken. Oh, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh.
Come on, we sing this power.
There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. There's power in your name. And my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
Well, hey, Metro, before we get into this next time of worship, just a couple quick announcements for you guys. This past Sunday, Gen City in 1825 restarted their ministries. They're meeting at the Riverview campus at 6 o'clock. Gen City is for middle schoolers and high school, 6 o'clock at our Riverview campus. And then 1825 is at 8:30. Riverview campus, 8:30. If you're a student, 6th grade or 12th grade, you do not want to miss Gen City. And for any of our college students who are single, or young adults who are single, we want to encourage you. This is a space for you guys to build community, to grow together, and to have a great time. And these ministries, our leaders work hard to create a space where you guys can feel comfortable. It's safe. We have sanitation stations all over the building to ensure social distancing as well. So we want to encourage you guys, come on out. You will not regret it. This weekend is actually a special weekend. If you're watching our online service, you probably know that we've been doing outdoor services the past couple weeks. But this week, we're actually canceling our outdoor services at the Taylor campus, and we are at Evangel Ministries in Detroit. This is an opportunity for two churches to come together and worship one God. It's Sunday at 11:30, so if you are watching right now, if you're watching on Saturday at 4:30 or 6:30, or even Sunday morning at 9:30, or 8:45, or even 10:15, we want to encourage you, come out to the 11:30 service at the Evangels Ministries Church down in Detroit. All the information is on the app. If you have not downloaded the Metro app, you can download it on the Google Play Store for Androids or the Apple App Store for iPhone users. All the information is also on our website and our social media platforms. So we want to encourage you. This is an opportunity for all of us, all different races, all different backgrounds, to come together and worship one God. So we hope to see you there. But hey, before we go into this next time of worship, if you call Metro home, we want to encourage you guys to be faithful with your giving. And maybe you haven't taken that next step with giving before, but we want to encourage you. Maybe this is your opportunity to take your next step with God, with your finances, and to trust Him to trust him with your finances and trust him that when he says that he is a provider, that he will indeed provide. I know that I've seen it in my life. There's been times in my life where I'm struggling with money and maybe things are tight and I'm like, Lord, this 10%, I need it, but I'm gonna trust you. And I've seen God in my life time and time again, come through for me. And I know it may sound like prosperity gospel, and there's this kind of misconception that the church is trying to take your money, but that's not the case here. We believe that God wants to do great things in our church as we do our best to create fully devoted followers of Jesus, and that takes money. This whole production takes money, and we're doing our best to steward that money well. And so you can trust us with that. You can give on the app, on the website, but we want to encourage you. Let's trust God with our finances and believe that he's going to do a great work here. So come on, let's worship together. Come on, let's sing. He is jealous. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us. And how he loves us so. Oh, how you love us, God, yeah. Come on, let's sing that verse 1 again. He is jealous. He is jealous for me. And love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. Come on, when all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us, how he loves us so. Come on, we sing that again. Sing oh. And oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves. Come on, we sing. How he loves us so. Yeah, he loves. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. Yeah, he loves. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. 'Cause we are his portion, and he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. Come on, let's shout this out together. Come on. So heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss, and my heart turns violently inside of my chest. I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way that he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. Yeah, he loves us. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. When we sing he loves, yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. Come on, one more time. He loves. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves.
I can't go back to the beginning. I can't control what tomorrow may bring, but I know here in the middle is the place where you promised to be. And I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? And as I walk now through the valley, let your love rise above every fear, like the sun shaping the shadow. In my weakness, your glory appear. 'Cause I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? And 'cause unless you come, will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again?
So, Father, today, Lord, we say that we are not enough, Jesus. Without you, Father, we are not enough. So, Father, we ask that you would come once again, Father, and fill us up. Fill us up with your love, Lord. If there was ever a time that we needed your love, Father God, it would be now. So, Father, I pray that you would fill us up. Lord, give us a fresh pouring of who you are, Lord. Lord, would you continue to reveal yourself to us, Father? Lord, we know that you are near. Lord, in your word, you say that you are near to the brokenhearted. Father, all over this nation, Lord, we have people that are brokenhearted, Lord, people that need you. Lord, we need you. Father, I pray that we would be a people that would draw near to your heart, Jesus. We would draw near to your heart, Father. Lord, would you give us peace that surpasses all understanding? Jesus, we thank you. Lord, we know that you are good and you are still working. Lord, so we choose to trust that. We choose to trust that today. Lord, and for those that are watching this experience right now, Father, I pray that you would just touch their hearts and remind them that you are near. Whether we're going through a hard situation or life is pretty great, Lord, would you remind us that you are near? Not for a minute were we forsaken. You are with us, Jesus. You are with us. In your name I pray. Amen.
All right, everybody. Welcome again to another online church experience with Metro. I am just delighted that you're here. And we've been in this series called Good Question, and we have been trying to deal with some of the hard issues of faith, questions about God and the Bible and how it all works into modern life and culture. And I think this is just a really important series because I think every single one of us has doubts and questions about those issues. And so we thought we would just spend some time and talk about some really real stuff. But before we get into that, let me just encourage you, if you are watching online and haven't made it back to church with our outdoor live experiences, I would love to invite you to join us. We feel it's safe. There's 2 different spaces. There's parking if you want to stay in your cars kind of away from everybody, or you can mingle and get up front. But we do feel it's safe, and I'm telling you, we've done it twice now, and it has been incredible. So many people, and they love it, and it's just been a great experience, and we would love for you and your family to join us next weekend. All right, so let's talk about another really good question, and the question is, has science crushed God? Has science put an end to God? Now, I hear people say this. They say science is always closing the gap between what we know and what we don't know. And friends, listen, that's true, isn't it? Because before science moved to the forefront of our mind, people used to use religion oftentimes, or God, to fill in those gaps. For example, centuries ago, people would hear thunder and they would explain it like the gods are angry or something like that. Or maybe you would read in the Bible something and it would describe a scene when somebody was demon possessed. But now we'd say, well, more than likely they had schizophrenia or maybe epilepsy or something like that. So, back in the day, what might have been attributed to demon possession, we wouldn't necessarily attribute it to that today. But eventually, our knowledge through science will grow so much that science will close all the gaps and will push God out. That is what people say. Some say that science has crushed God and has destroyed our need for this sort of made-up God, right? Maybe you've heard this. And the issue is the issue of the gaps. Science will eventually fill those gaps and eliminate our understanding and our need for God. And as a matter of fact, I would say that science has gone beyond science and has waged an all-out war against faith. Have you seen this going on? I think this is real, that science has waged a war against faith. Let me give you some background on this. Dr. Lawrence M. Krauss, a world-renowned physicist, wrote an article in an ever-popular New Yorker, the New Yorker magazine, and the title was, "All Scientists Should Be Militant Atheists." I mean, think about that title, right? All scientists should be militant atheists. I wonder what he really thinks, you know? But here is what he wrote in the article, quote, "This commitment to open questioning is deeply tied to the fact that science is an atheistic enterprise. It's ironic, really, that so many people are fixated on the relationship between science and religion." And listen, this is why, because he says there isn't one. Basically, there isn't one. In other words, smart people know that science has crushed God, right? Religious people are backwards and they're dumb and they're out of touch. And if you pay attention to media or the educational circles out there, this is all that we're told, right? Krauss goes on to say it like this, quote, he says, "It's inevitable that it draws people, science, draws people from religion or away from a belief in God." That's the position of so many militant atheistic scientists, right? So can I just humbly but confidently say, this is not only a pipe dream, but this is simply false. This will never happen. The great atheist leader, theoretical physicist, cosmopolitist, author, a guy named Stephen Hawking, he said it like this, cosmologist, I'm sorry. He said it like this. He said, in his book called The Grand Design, Hawking said that he'd explain the theory, quote, the theory of everything. Maybe a little bit arrogant, even for a really brilliant man like Hawking. But he says, I'm going to try to explain how science has explained everything, and there is no need for God. On page 5 of his book, he said something that I found really interesting. I think you might as well. This is what he said. He said, not only is God dead, but so is philosophy. Philosophy is dead because science has killed it. And what's interesting is that theologians like me, Christians like me, didn't have to respond to him. Philosophers all over the world of all stripes and all beliefs responded on our behalf. I mean, they really came against this guy. As a matter of fact, the head of the philosophy department at Cambridge University, which is no conservative Bible school, I'm telling you that right now, he wrote this in response to Stephen Hawking's. Okay, he said, quote, "Maybe the remarkable Professor Hawking hasn't recognized that we've kept up with his discipline, science, much more than he has kept up with ours, philosophy." In other words, science can't explain everything. You think about this idea of love, right? Can science explain love? You can take 100 of the best minds on planet Earth and you get them to examine it and tear apart this question or this concept of love or this idea of love. And I don't care how smart someone is or how many science degrees they might have, love can't be explained by science. Pause. You know this. You know it can't be just explained away by chemicals or, physics or something of that nature, because it's not a science question. It's not a physical, tangible thing. Sex is a physical, tangible thing, but love is not. Love is something utterly different than that. My kids are home educated, and my kids learn that love is called an abstract noun. You can't touch it, but you know it when you see it, right? You can't scientifically explain an abstract noun. You can't scientifically explain love. And here's my point. Science doesn't corner the market on truth. It really doesn't. Science doesn't own the market on truth. Faith isn't afraid of truth and challenging science. Faith isn't afraid of science. Mark Twain once wrote this. He says, faith is believing what you know ain't true. He was a great writer and he was very funny, but he wasn't always right. Richard Dawkins, again, an evolutionary biologist and author, perhaps one of the best known atheists in the modern world, describes faith like this. He says, quote, "Faith is persistent false belief in the face of strong contradictory evidence. Now think about that. In other words, he says faith amounts to wishful thinking. Someone who has faith in something when there is no evidence for that something. Faith is the uninformed, he says, with no evidence. But on the other hand, you have science, and that's what he says is all there is. He says, on one hand, you have faith, but there's no evidence for that. But you have science, and there's all kinds of evidence just to believe or to put your hope only in what science teaches. And so like Dr. Krauss said, there's no relationship, they say, between science and faith. But then, listen, on the other hand, some other very, very smart people, like world-renowned Oxford professor and mathematician John Lennox, who says it like this. He says, quote, faith is a response to evidence, not rejoicing in the absence of it, right? And so you have completely the opposite opinion. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Professor Lennox lectures. Like, if you ever watch one of them online, be prepared just to have your mind blown up. This guy is amazing and brilliant. And he writes so strongly as a scientist, as a world-renowned mathematician. He writes so strongly on behalf of the legitimacy of faith. My friend and Biola professor, University of Biola, Professor PhD Sean McDowell says this about faith and the evidence of faith. He says, faith is not belief in the spite of evidence, but belief in the light of evidence. You hear that? He wrote that in a book called Is God Just a Human Invention? So who's right? It seems like people couldn't be any farther apart, right? Like they're polar opposites. Now let's throw in the Bible a little bit to this mix, right? About this idea of faith and how it can stand up to science, right? Interesting. It says this in the book of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. It says, now faith is what? Confidence. Not just hope, guess, pray, and wonder, but it says it's confidence in what we hope for and an assurance about what we do not see. You know, we could spend all day unpacking that, right? But the bottom line is this. Faith, a lot of people says, is blind, that it is not backed by evidence. But that's not entirely true. Now, faith does have some measure of jumping. It does have some measure of I am not able to put all of the answers together. But faith is not in spite of evidence. It's in the light of evidence. Now, let me take you somewhere else a little bit here. This little passage helps inform that verse that we just read. It's found in John's book. It's one of the Gospels that records the story of Jesus. He was one of the earliest followers of Jesus, and he literally wanted people to know about who Jesus was and what he saw Jesus do and what he heard Jesus say. So he recorded the story of Jesus' life. And in the book of John, chapter 20, verse 30, it says something interesting. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not even recorded in this book, but they are written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John was saying the whole point of this book that he wrote was to provide a first-hand account, a trustworthy account, a collection of evidences about the life of Jesus. Why? So that your faith would be informed. So your faith won't be just blind. This is what the witnesses saw. So we would say, for Christians, we would say that in light of the biblical historical writings about Jesus, there is plenty of evidence for the miraculous God who we often say is unseen. And here's something else that Jesus said. Real quick, he said this, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And so for me, and for Christians like me, if you're a skeptic or if you're a science guy who says, show me the evidence, listen, we are with you. I am with you. Like, I don't want to just believe blindly. I want to search for truth, and I want to know the truth. The truth is important. The truth is what will give us peace. The truth is what will give us direction. And so we can just agree that we're at least on the same search, the search for truth. And truth really does matter. And so here's where I'd like to, for us to go in our little talk over the next few minutes. I want us to tackle a few big thoughts about this idea. Has science crushed God? I want to do my best to give you some rational thinking, some reasonable thoughts that the Christian faith and science is not always at odds, and that science does not corner the market on truth. So you ready for this? If you're ready, go ahead and type in the comments there. I'm ready. And don't forget, if you ever have questions about faith or any of this stuff, we would love those questions. You can email them to the church office at metrocitychurch.tv, and we will do our best to give you a reasonable reply for those very difficult and reasonable questions that you would have, all right? So here is my first big thought. I'm calling it the myth of conflict. It's different than the myth of conflict we talked about when we talked about the conflicts, seemingly apparent conflicts in the written word of the Bible. This is different than that. It's the myth that people who believe in God don't believe in science. That's a myth. That science and God and science and faith are in conflict with one another. That's just not true. I am not an anti-science guy. I don't know any Christian who says, we don't believe in anything that science people say, or we don't want science to inform our beliefs. I don't know anybody like that. All across all of the disciplines, even in major universities, the deeper people, listen, deep people, deep thinking people are delving into the sciences and into the philosophies and into psychology and into the world of history and archaeology, and they are finding that evidence is pointing them into a relationship with God, a belief in God, not away from Him. This is often called the myth of secular society by sociologists, that science is just driving people away from God. 100 years ago, as cosmology, the study of the universe, went deeper, and biology went deeper, and psychology went deeper, people began to abandon faith. It was the Enlightenment era, hundreds of years ago, right? But no one would be. People would say a couple hundred years ago, at the height of the Enlightenment era, that there would be no Christians by the 21st century. But friends, we find that to not be true at all. There are hundreds of millions of people, despite all of the science pushing against faith. Christianity, the Christian faith, belief in God, is flourishing around the world. There's something going on in our world that many new atheists, those that are what we call in the new atheist movement, they find it utterly shocking, because as science has gone deeper, it's created a purely secular culture. At least they thought that that's what would happen. But the truth is, I believe now more than ever, people are open to spiritual truth in their life. A guy named Quintin Smith is a professor of philosophy at Western Michigan University in my home state. He's very popular in scholarly circles, and he is an ardent, and I mean an ardent atheist. He has started he actually wrote this because he started to bemoan the fact that in recent years, philosophy departments around the globe have started to be taken over by Christian thinker. Smith wrote this in Philo magazine. It's probably the leading philosophical scholarly journal on the planet. And he writes this, quote, he says, "The field of philosophy is being desecularized in the universities across America. A full 1/4 to 1/3 of philosophy departments now consist of theists, those people that believe in God, and are generally," he says, quote, "are generally Christians." I find that really interesting. The reason that Smith is upset about this is because of one man, a guy named Alvin Karl Plantinga. He is recognized as literally one of the greatest living philosophers on earth. He's like the Socrates of our day, if you will, right? He actually lives in Michigan as well, and he is the chair of philosophy at Kelvin College out in the west side of Michigan in the Grand Rapids area, and he is a very outspoken Christian, and yet he's one of the world's leading, if not the world's leading, philosophy teacher. His writings have a tremendous influence in the world of ethics and morality in the face of incredible moral decline in our world. Think about that. There's a myth that Christians don't believe in science. There is this myth that smart people don't believe in God, but truth matters to people of faith. Truth does matter to people like me. But in so many people's minds, the average Christian is a guy living in the swamps of Louisiana with like one tooth, or, and he's like, I got a I love Jesus shirt, and he's got a bumper sticker that says Oprah's the Antichrist or something like that, right? That's how they view people of faith. But the reality is that people of faith embrace truth wherever we find it. And we are often leading the way in finding truth in the worlds of science and biology, math and philosophy and all of these things. Take, for example, a man named Anthony Flew. He is the world-leading atheist thinker in the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s. Absolutely brilliant man. His last book was called There Is a God, with the subtitle, The World's Most Notorious Atheist Changes His Mind. And the reason he said that he changed his mind was because when he looked at the complexity of human creation, when he looked at the complexity of DNA and all of the evidence surrounding it, after decades and decades of militant atheism, he concluded there had to be a divine creator. It's people like the famed Oxford mathematician Dr. John Lennox, and another guy named Dr. David Hunt, a world-renowned mathematician from UCLA. It's people like microbiologist Alistair McGrath, who once was a leading atheist in our world. Now he is the professor of theology, ministry, and education at King's College in London. It's people like Francis Collins, who was given the job of mapping out the human DNA. Remember that project that was very popular over a decade ago now? It was called the Human Genome Project. Well, this guy was an atheist. He was the leading scientist on it, and he goes into immense detail, immense research that led him away from his agnostic or atheistic beliefs toward a relationship with Jesus. As he dove deeper and deeper into the sciences, he found that the sciences were evidence not pointing him away from God, but toward God. It actually did the exact opposite. And he ends up writing a masterful book, and you should read it one day. It's called The Language of God, where he says that the brilliance of design and the complexity was far too great for random chance to be the cause. But we have come, he writes, quote, from a creative designer. And this is the kind of stuff that's not shouted in the news, right? Or from schools or from our universities. For example, David Bentley Hart, who is a very popular philosopher. He's a theologian. He's a sociologist. He received his doctorate from Cambridge University. That's not a small task. And he says, I do not regard true philosophical atheism as intellectually valid or even a cognate position, right? In fact, he says, I see it as fundamentally an irrational view of reality, which can only be explained as the absence of curiosity and a fervently resolute will to believe the absurd. Listen to that. The case to believe in God, he writes, is so much more inductively stronger than the case for unbelief that true philosophical atheism must be regarded as a superstition. That's pretty intense. Writing, that's amazing writing from one of the smart guys on planet Earth. And I could literally go on and on and on about very smart people, much smarter than me. And I know that surprises you that there's anybody smarter than me out there. But no, there are. I mean, no, a whole world of smart people, right, who have decided that it is rational and reasonable to believe in God, to put their hope in a relationship with their Creator God. And so here's the second myth I want to talk about that's out there. It's called the myth of openness, right? If you listen to anybody in the press or in the media who writes or speaks for the new atheist-style movement, they will tell you that people of faith, people like me, have somehow been tricked into believing this belief in God, that they think that Christians already have this idea of God, and so they just want to believe in God, and anything that remotely defends their faith or position is completely latched onto, and that Christians are not, quote, open to the sciences. They believe that they are the ones who are open. And people of faith that we're just not open to evidence, that we're just not open to reality. As a matter of fact, Richard Dawkins, listen to this. He's one of the most famous atheists on planet Earth, right, during his time. He said, I am just following the evidence. The true scientists, listen, that true scientists are skeptical, open, and just want the truth. That's what he says. Friends, but I don't think that's true at all. Humbly, I mean really humbly, I think that everyone who holds a faith position, that holds a theistic position, is open to truth. Because we believe God is true. And funny is that if an atheist is seeking truth, I want to show you that they don't seem to be too open. So we both say we have the same position of being open, but really, are they open? And I think there's a myth to this. Listen, as a matter of fact, Richard Lewittin, he is a professor of biology and a professor of zoology at Harvard University, a very smart guy. He studies what they call naturalism, right? He likes to call himself a naturalist. Listen to what he writes, quote, as scientists, we have a prior commitment to materialism. It's not that the methods or the institutions of science somehow compel us to accept the material explanations of the phenomenal world we live in. He goes, on the contrary, listen to this. We are forced by our a priori, or a previous adherence to material causes, for we cannot allow, he writes, a divine foot in the door. In other words, he says, we don't want God to be real, so no matter where the evidence leads, we're not going to allow God to be real. We have a prior belief system that says he's not real, so we're only looking at things that back up our belief. We've already ruled God out. Does this sound like a true scientist? Does this sound like, I thought scientists were supposed to be seekers of truth, that they were supposed to be open. What's driving his science is not science, but a philosophy or a faith in atheism. That's what's driving his work. One of the things that you'll hear all the time is that the church has always been against science. Friends, this is just not true. Anybody who really studies this knows this. But professor after professor after professor seemed to propagate this view. Even when I was in college, every professor just seemed to belittle Christian thinking and Christians who said they were open to truth and sciences and that kind of thing. For example, when mathematician, astronomer, and Catholic cleric, a guy named Nicholas Copernicus, presented his Hellenistic worldview. Remember this? He said, here's what I figured out. This Christian thinker, listen, he says, the sun is not revolving around the earth, it's the other way around. The earth is revolving around the sun. The sun is the center of the universe, not the earth. Do you know who were the biggest opponents of Copernicus were? Who were the biggest opponents to his discovery of this? It wasn't the church. The church didn't care. The church didn't give a rip about this at the time. It was the philosophical, the political, and the scientific community. Why? Because they had been teaching for hundreds and hundreds of years that the earth was the center of the universe, and everything including the sun, revolved around the earth. Science was teaching that. It was a religious thinker who combined his study of scripture and his observations of the natural world and put two and two together and came up with the right philosophy, and science absolutely opposed him. Another example would be in the 1920s when Edward Hubble, remember the Hubble telescope? Well, it was named after this guy. He perfected his telescope and he started looking into the expanse of the universe, and he came up with this theory called the Big Bang Theory. And he says the Big Bang Theory is the beginning of the universe. Do you know who pushed against this concept that the universe sprung into existence, that it exploded into existence? Friends, it wasn't the church. It was the scientific community. It's held almost by everybody now. Says that the very idea that the science began that the universe began in a single moment is true. Almost all the scientists believe that. Almost everybody believes that the world as we know it began in one moment. All space, time, matter, and energy, all of it came into existence in a single moment. but they say it reeked of religion. The early scientists, when he was propagating this theory, they were all saying, no, it's too religious in nature. And yet now, everybody believes it. But science at his time utterly rejected it. And they rejected it because it was called Nehi Lo, I think is how you say it in Latin, which is Latin for out of nothing came something, right? And science believed back then that nothing plus nothing would always produce nothing. But now they want us to believe that nothing plus nothing produces something, right? Christians believe that the original something was God. We believe that nothing plus nothing equals nothing. We believe what scientists have believed for thousands of years, up until recently. Now they believe nothing plus nothing equals something, but we believe that nothing plus nothing equals nothing. In other words, Hubble and others started to say that something had to exist before the creation of everything, because you always need, what he said, a cause for something to happen, right? We talk about this from time to time. You need a cause. It's like when Lynette and I are in bed and all of a sudden there is a noise in the house in the middle of the night. It wakes her up, she'll jump up and she'll say, what was that? Did you hear that? What would you hear that? Did you hear that? And I'll say, like all good husbands say, honey, it was nothing. Go back to sleep. Everything's fine. It was nothing. And she'll say, nothing doesn't sound like that. Go check. And so I hand her the gun and I say, you go check. But who's more reasonable? The husband that says it's nothing, or the wife that says nothing doesn't sound like that? The wife is more reasonable. You know that, right? We're trying to be reasonable. We're trying to be logical, reasonable people. It would not suffice to say there was this noise in the middle of the night and it was caused by nothing. It just wouldn't be reasonable. But the scientific community still says out of nothing comes all that we know. My point is simple. Absolutely, people like me, people of faith, the church, has resisted so-called scientific truth at times, that we haven't been open to it at times. But I think the same can be said of the scientific world, that they haven't been open to truth always as well. Here's the third thought, and this is just going to be real quick. It's called the myth of evolution. There is this push out there from science that says evolution has given us all of our answers, that we don't need God. Evolution has explained the origin of everything and the complexity of everything and the morality and destiny, and thus God. Morality, because science has explained all this, morality and destiny and God does not need to exist. Friends, listen, I don't believe that at all. I might not be the brightest thinker on planet Earth, but even if evolution was true, let's just say that we started as a speck of space dust out there somewhere, and that non-living space dust jumped into some living thing called a cell, and then that singular cell became a more complex cell, and then that more complex cell jumped into being a dolphin, and that dolphin jumped into being a monkey, and then you were there. Then the monkey jumped into you. Even if that were true, listen, friends, that would not explain away God, not at all. That is a massive assumption. You can't just say because evolution is true, there is no God. You actually have to prove that evolution doesn't require a beginner for the beginning. Did you hear that? In order for evolution not to be true, you have to prove that evolution doesn't require a beginner for the beginning. You have to prove that God wasn't involved to get all that has begun. You have to ask, so where did that first speck of space dust even come from if there was nothing, right? Friends, you just can't call a theory a fact. A theory, the theory of evolution, is simply a theory, and it's not fact, and it's not proven. You actually have to prove this stuff. This is why classical evolutionists that have taught us for at least the last 100 years isn't universally accepted across all sciences and all philosophical disciplines, like the Big Bang Theory is accepted, right? It's because you have to prove some of these steps. You have to prove what they call the first cause. You have to prove the cause for extraordinary complexity. You can't just say, well, nothing produced something, and then that little something produced everything else. You actually have to have prove some sort of fossil record or something, right? The fact is, listen though, the fact is that transitional fossil record is a big, big problem. We have tons of fossils. Listen closely to this about evolution. We have tons of fossil records, but just not tons of or any transitional fossil records. We have none. We have fully formed fossils of elephants, horses, penguins, and even human beings from centuries ago, and every other kind of living thing. But there is no, listen to me, there are no transitional fossils of any kind. There are no half whale, half horse fossils. There are no half zebra, half fish fossils. There are no half dog, half cat fossils. That would be just evil to me. There are no horse became a whale or a chicken became a zebra fossils at all. No, listen, there are no transitional fossils. And this is a big problem for evolution. They want us simply to believe that these jumps occurred with no evidence at all. Check this out. This is so important because you and I and our kids have been fed a lie. Listen to this. Stephen Jay Gould, one of the leading microbiologists, one of the leading atheists in his day, and defenders of evolution, one of the leading evolutionists on planet Earth, once wrote this. Listen to this. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. A paleontologist is someone who basically studies natural history through the fossil record. He says the evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and the nodes of the branches. The rest is simply inference. However reasonable, it is not evidence of fossils. It is not in the evidence of fossils. So just think about this. This is crazy. We have the tips, and so let us work backwards from there. That's what he's saying. He says, you got this general idea, but let us just form an entire worldview based off an idea that we have. In other words, we won't let God be real, so let's just start with an idea that man has evolved into man, and let's just make it up by going backwards. Friends, that seems like a leap of faith to me. That does not seem like science to me. There is so much that we could talk about, but I just want you to think about some of this for a little bit. One more quick thought, and we'll wrap it up with this. There is another myth, and I'm just going to call it the myth of conclusion. The myth of conclusion. It's the myth that science always draws the right conclusions. Come on. They say, you can trust science. You can trust it. It's real. This has been studied. You can trust it, right? People have studied this. Well, let me ask you, have you ever heard something was bad for people, and then all of a sudden it's now good for people, and then it was bad for people again, but now it's good for people again? Even you diehard skeptics who will go like, I'm just a science guy, you have to laugh at some of this stuff, right? Because we're told that in one era, we're told that coffee is going to kill you. And then in another era, we're told that coffee is the greatest thing on planet Earth for you. Then we're told that fat is from the devil and carbs are good. And then now we're told that fat is fine, but carbs are bad, right? In one era, we're told that red meat is great for you. And then we're told red meat is terrible for you. And then they say this is what's really crazy. They say, we're told that chocolate is bad, and then we're told that chocolate is good, and then we're told that chocolate is bad again. Now listen, let me tell you something. I don't care what science says about chocolate. I am going to eat chocolate. I am a Christian, and I'm a pretty deep thinker, but I do not care what they say, good or bad, about chocolate. I love it, all right? But I tell you this because, listen, science tells us we've decided for you that there is no God. We've decided the cause of life is evolution, right? We've decided that there is just biology, that there is no creator. We've done the study and we've made all the right conclusions. We need to do the thinking for you. You simple people have no right to think on your own. Let us think for you. Friends, I just don't buy it. I want you to think about something that Stephen Hawking wrote one time, and it's in his book called The Grand Design. I'm just going to read it for you, and I want you to think really careful. Stephen Hawking, one of the world's smartest people, they say, one of the greatest physicists, thinkers, one of the leading atheists in the world, and he writes all kinds of fancy stuff. And some of the conclusions he draws are just crazy. Listen to what he writes in his book called The Grand Design. He says this, quote, "Because there is a law such as gravity." Now think about this. He says, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. He's trying to explain why everything exists. He says, this is why the universe exists. This is why we exist. Now, but think about what he just said. Look at this conclusion. I am either dumb, or maybe I'm just not smart enough to understand what he's trying to communicate here, but I have no idea how he draws this conclusion. It makes no sense to me. None, zilch, zero. This is beyond speculative. He says what he says is nothing more than guesswork that denies 8th grade physical science that we teach our kids, right? He says, again, let me read this to you again. He says, because there is a law such as gravity, this is his big statement in his book, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. What? What? Laws themselves don't create anything. Scientific laws don't create anything. They merely give us a description of what's happening or what's going to happen under certain conditions. That's exactly what they taught us in 8th grade, right? That these scientific laws help us to understand the going-ons of our world. They are the laws that make up the regular happenings, but they don't make up what happens. Listen, in physical science, we are taught that physics is the study of the natural world, and we're taught that you had to have something physical, listen, before you can observe anything, right? And the law of physics is when you have something that is observable, repeatable, and perfectly consistent. Like a law would be water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit every single time. That's a law of physics. It never changes, right? Gravity is a law of physics that never changes. What goes up must come down eventually, right? You with me so far? Do you agree? I think you can agree to this stuff, right? This is basic science. So how can there be any laws of physics, such as gravity, before anything exists, including gravity? Think about it. He's saying that there were laws of nature before there were nature. There are laws of nature before there was nature. Come on, that's crazy. That just does not make sense to me. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand this, but this is child talk to me. That sounds smart, and you put a big bunch of letters after the guy's name, and it's like anything he says, people go, wow, you're smarter than I am, so it must be true. But that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. I went back and I read tons of articles trying to read people who were trying to interpret his book, and I just couldn't understand it. And I'm not that dumb of a person. I just couldn't make any sense of it. And then listen to the conclusion he draws. And so much of the science world stands up and cheers it on and says, you are so brilliant, Mr. Hawkins. You're just so brilliant. He says, spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. Why the universe exists, why we exist. He's trying to answer the question, how can nothing produce something? And he just comes up with some fancy words and basically says, yeah, I know it's crazy, but things sort of spontaneously create themselves. What? I don't know anything that spontaneously creates himself. You were not created spontaneously. I mean, it might have been a spontaneous act, but somebody looked at somebody and somebody got a little excited, right? There was something there. It wasn't just spontaneous. Now listen, I'm sure he is super smart and all that, but science is observable. It is repeatable. It is rational. Nothing spontaneously creates itself. This is gibberish talk to me. And yet he has sold millions of books, and he has led countless people to think, well, that's science, so that settles it. That's ridiculous. Alistair McGrath, who also holds a doctorate in both chemistry and micromolecular biology, he's doing pretty good for himself, right? He is a former atheist, and he writes this. Very interesting. Scientists know that they don't have to comment on everything. Scientists know that they don't have to comment on everything. Just what can be shown to be true by rigorous and testable investigations. Science only speaks or seeks to describe the forms and the processes of this world and declines, real science, he says, declines to comment on issues of meaning and value. It stands above ethical, political, and religious debates. And it is right to do so. This is what he writes. In other words, he says, this is where, in other words, this is where we started, right? Like science and faith do not answer the same questions all the time. And when they do, they don't always end up with the same answers or conclusions. But it does not mean that they are mutually exclusive either. And it does not mean that people of faith are always wrong and people of science are always right. That is categorically ridiculous. Just want to read one more thing to you, and then we'll get out of here. It's important that you hear this. This is from a brilliant guy. His name is David Berlinski. And he's a non-practicing Jew. He is not a believer. He would categorize himself as someone who was once an atheist and has moved toward agnosticism. He's an agnostic, okay? Very smart fella. He's got a PhD in both philosophy and a double doctorate in the fields of mathematics and microbiology. Pretty smart guy, right? 3 PhDs. I don't understand how these people can go to school for so long and get all this stuff, but they're smart and they do. But he writes this book, and it's a book in response to the great atheist Richard Dawkins and his book called The God Delusion. So an agnostic, somebody who says, I'm not really sure that there's a God, is writing a book in response to one of the leading atheists of our world. And Berlinski's book is called The Atheist Delusion, okay? So he writes against the God delusion, and he writes a book called The Atheist Delusion. And this is what is printed on the back flap of the book. You can go read this for yourself. You can go to Amazon and find the book. You can read this on the flap. It says, has anyone provided a proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have the sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it is not a religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism in moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or in their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark, he writes. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Then he writes, dead on. Dead on. The Atheist Delusion. That's Berlinski. He's not making a case for any religion, but he's saying that the sciences move into territory that they don't have a right to move into, that they're not equipped to answer. And it's arrogance and foolishness and very unscientific of them to try to do so. So I say to you, science has been a great help in our world, no doubt about it, in the worlds of medicine or the fields of engineering or architecture, and the list goes on and on and on. But science does not answer all the questions of life about love and meaning and purpose and why are we here and is there a God and is faith real at all? Science isn't built to answer those questions. No, science has not crushed God, in my opinion. And if science is your issue for not believing, then I think a reasonable person can put that issue to rest. You can explore issues of faith without feeling like you're stupid, like you're ignorant. You can be open to faith issues and dive into some of these things. You can read the Bible with an open mind because the Bible is not opposed to science. Christians are not opposed to science. And my hope is, my friend, if you're not a believer, that you won't be afraid of the truth that might be found in the Bible for you. Check it out. And if you are a Christian, my hope today that you'll have been strengthened a little bit to know that your faith is not opposed to the world of science, and don't let anybody ever tell you that it is. All right, let me pray for you and let me pray for your family because I believe that there is a God who loves you and wants to do life with you and wants to encourage you today. Jesus, I come before you and I pray that your Spirit would bless my friends who are watching on video right now. I pray that your Spirit would speak to them, that you would open up hearts and open up minds, that you would bring peace and hope in every area of their life. In Jesus' name, amen.